When in doubt, think of the consumer need. It is not what the company can offer, what it can manufacture efficiently, what satisfies the manager's objectives, or what makes great financial sense, or what the boss's wife needs. But it is exactly what the consumer needs. And consumers are the measure of all commercial activities. So if you can please the consumer, you are there.
Hi all, welcome everyone to yet another episode of the Banyan Tree, a series of video interviews where Souradip and I try to satisfy our curiosity and our thirst for knowledge by interviewing some of the best non-fiction Indian authors. And this is another episode in association with Marketing, the marketing club of MDI. They are hosting a marketing conclave on 12th of December, the invitation for which will be posted in the comment box later. But it's going to be a very interesting session with some of the industry experts joining in and giving everyone the opportunity to also ask questions, to areas that have always been elusive to us. So would request you all to please be a part of it and learn as much as you can. Uh, our guest for today is a power couple, I guess, which makes it all the more exciting for us to be questioning. This is the first time Sauradeep and I interviewing two people at the time, and I would rather have Sauradeep introduce the book and our authors for the day.
Thank you, Sahil. I have the book with me. This is the book both Sahil and I have been reading for the past couple of weeks, and it's very, very interesting, I must tell you. The description to this book would be there in a description box. And just a bit of introduction. The title of the book is Pragmarketism, Pragmatic Marketing Insights for Winning Indian Customers. Trupti Bhandari, Arvind Bhandari are the authors. So Trupti Bhandari happens to be, she was the executive vice president of GSK until very recently, and right now she is a brand strategy consultant and leadership coach. Arvind, on the other hand, happens to be executive vice president and director nutrition for South Asia region at Nestle. Now, this particular book has tons of endorsement from the stalwarts of the industry: Prasun Joshi, Harsh Goenka. Uh, you know, uh, there are many, and a couple of them are also our previous guests like Ambi Parameshwaran, etc. You should definitely go through this book. Now, this book particular has kind of 14 chapters, which covers all aspects of marketing, but from a very Indian perspective. Something both Sahil and I are marketing grads from MDI, and something which seemed missing in our MBA curriculum, I should say. So this gives you a practical aspects and sets out a chart out a road for you uh, for being a successful marketer in India. Now, how you walk on that road as a practicing marketer is, of course, up to you. Now, on that note, thank you, Tripti, Arvind, for accepting our invite and being on the show. Uh, our very first question to you is, what inspired you to write this book, and why did you feel that this particular book was need of the time and the market?
Okay. So okay, let me go with it. So as you just introduced us, both of us have been in this business for almost 25 years each, and various interactions with agencies, creative agencies, various presentations. We've been jury members for a lot of contests where people have put out their case studies. One thing that we both of us felt was that the understanding of the Indian consumer was quite limited. And even if it was there, then it was not reflected, because there was somewhere a shyness to bring out the real Indian consumer. So when we thought a little more about it, we felt this was primarily because of one, our MBA education, which is completely based on Western theories, Western frameworks, Western examples, and which is why we try to apply them to an Indian market, an Indian consumer who is very different. He is or she is very rooted in cultural realities which are different from the Western cousins. So the first thing was the MBA education. The second thing that we felt was even when you look at the books or the reference material that we have, once again, that is written mostly by theoreticians, by academicians, by consultants, not really by practitioners who understand what it means to run a business in the difficult Indian market. The situations are so different, the challenges are different, the solutions are very different. So that was the second thing, something which is written by those who have been there. That was missing. And the third thing is the consumer. The Indian consumer is a very, very different consumer because she is evolving far more rapidly than anyone. See, on one hand, we have our traditional values, and on the other hand, digital marketing is evolving so fast. In India, we all know digitalization is at the fastest. Even your maid in the house has a phone which she uses day in and day out, and she watches YouTube over it. My mother, who is 75 years old, has turned on to video. She has apps. So at across sectors, across ages, across financial capacity, you find that digitalization is really moving up. So this consumer is a fused consumer, modern at one end, traditional at one end. So the solutions that will apply for this consumer are different. They're not those which were applicable, say, 20 years back. And putting those three things together, we felt that there was a need to come out with something which was based on our experience, which amply covers Indian examples and Western examples, and talks about frameworks which are relevant to the Indian consumer. So that was the entire genesis, and therefore we came up with Pragmarketism, which really, as you can see, the name itself says it's pragmatic marketing. So it is Indian, it is digital, it is holistic. So in the book, if you just showed the chapters, if you see, we start not from a typical marketing step of understanding the consumer need, which is of course very important, but you start from a business need, which is identifying and putting down your vision, which is inspirational for your stakeholders, who are your consumers, as well as your employees working in the company. Because when you have an inspiring vision, that is going to determine the direction that you're going to take and the way you're going to take that direction. So starting with the vision, and of course the steps of marketing are discussed in the book, but what it also captures is how this marketing should integrate with the selling strategy, which is the real moment of truth. So that's how we envisioned the whole thing, and we put down. So which is where the book is pragmatic, and I think everybody from entrepreneurs to brand managers to students, MBA students like you, should benefit from it.
Okay, I mean, I guess that's good to hear, and it makes me think. Even while reading the book, I had this thought that you are fairly experienced, like thoroughly, and combined experience of, I suppose, almost half a decade, right? And Souradip and I have just started our careers with graduating this year.
Sahil, correcting you, half a century, you meant.
Yeah, not half a decade.
half a century, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry for that, but I have always lived in metropolitans, and you start the book by explaining the Indian culture, by defining how the society is, right? And there was you sort of talk about how our caste systems, how our religion influences our decisions, and it felt very different to me, because I have never seen caste, religion, culture influencing people's decisions, at least where I'm from, right? Be it their relationships, be it their bank decisions, to me all of them seems very similar. Maybe that's my failure as a marketer, but the deep divides in the society don't seem to be coming out as well in the marketing segmentation case, right? So I was really curious to know about how your experience has been with the Indian consumer in terms of bringing out these deep divides in the country, and then actually leveraging them for your marketing. Any practical cases, any thoughts, any ideas on that?
It's interesting that we feel a little hesitant talking about religion and culture when we are talking about the consumer. And that's got to do with what Trupti said, that we have been very Western in our approach. We've taken Western metaphors, Western models, Western examples for most part, and applied to India. Now, think about it. West is probably a population of 200 million plus in US, or, few in Europe. And their formula is being applied to a population of 1 billion. Isn't that absurd? So I think the one thing people like you, and I hope all of you on the campus and your peers have to bring to the party, is the unabashed acceptance of Indianism. I think we've been a bit apologetic about it. It's time to bring it out of closet. Then that's one part. Second part is that, you see, when you talk about the consumer, the one thing that you will always tackle when you do it in a technical sense whether you're looking at insight or you're looking at need or you're looking for the real motivation of the consumer, you have to look at the consumer in entirety. The biggest marketeers, the smartest campaigns, the greatest advertisements have an insight. And insight comes when there is an understanding of the motivation. Motivation of a consumer cannot be understood unless you know him in entirety. Okay, the consumer, which is you, your mother, your father, live in a social economic system which is very wide. And to not include in their thinking what influences them, whether it's religion or culture or caste or old heritage that our country has, is to ignore a very large segment of who they are. So we end up being very often, because of our hesitation to look at the consumers in entirety, we end up becoming fairly superficial. And therefore our innovations, communication, our marketing projects either look like imitations of West or they're very superficial adaptations of the East. So we felt that we need to look at the consumer very closely. Now, interestingly, while we talk about the consumer, Indian sociology has never been a part of the MBA curriculum. You know, the first logical thing to ask is, if I'm talking about the consumer, then I must understand his context. And therefore, I must know the society in which he operates. And it's a surprise to me that while MBA is taken heavily from psychology, from commerce, from economics, from statistics, it has taken very sparsely from Indian sociology, anthropology, history, and culture, even though our primary task is to talk about the consumer. So what we've done in the first chapter is to look at the consumer, as in the Indian consumer, almost as though this was the only person on the planet, and to give him its due, and then to understand what really operates. And when you look at the Indian consumer, caste, religion, social system, joint families, arranged marriages, they become very, very important. And when you put those filters on, you will see how much of your advertising, your communication, your innovation will change. It will change a lot. And we've given examples of that. So, in fact, one of the criticism of our book has been that we've looked at caste system. Why not? If we have caste system in the society, our politics is driven by caste system. Why can't marketing understand what it is? What you choose to do with it later is your call. And most marketers will make their calls, which are pragmatic, which are prudent, which are business appropriate. But to not understand is a grave error. And therefore, you must start with understanding Indian society, understanding the Indian consumer in the context who he is. And then your analysis becomes that much more rich, and your inciting process will improve dramatically. That's our contention. So in the book, we start with Indian society, and we've taken heavy sort of theoretical jump into the subject and come out with some pearls of wisdom on how to structure the understanding of the Indian consumer. And if you scanned, you would have seen we've talked about hierarchy, holism, continuity, and transcendence, which are those four things which set the Indian consumer apart from his Western cousin. And if you don't appreciate that, then your communication lacks the punch. Your innovation lacks the relevance. And if you do, you can do wonders, which is why so many Indian companies who probably better reflect the ethos of our culture have done well, whereas a lot of multinational companies have failed. Okay, so that is the attempt, and we've tried to give a theoretical structure to it. So Indian MBAs, when they're coming up, bear this in mind. I mean, I can go on for this forever, but just to give you a small example, Indians are very hierarchy conscious. हमारी पिक्चरों में हीरो नंबर 1 होता है, हमारी ग्रेडिंग होती है एक्टर्स की, वी ग्रेड एक्टर्स एज शाहरुख खान इज नंबर 1, mango is the king of the fruit, lion is the king of the forest. Everywhere Indians tend to hierarchize, even the gods and goddesses are in hierarchies. This has an intricate linkage with the caste system, where castes are in a hierarchy. Now when you make a communication, I'm not saying you try and showcase the caste system, I'm saying understanding that psyche of the consumer gives you an edge in giving the consumer a sense of social importance. And if in your communication, innovation, product proposition, you're able to give the consumer a sense of significance, because that's what we seek when we hierarchize, we are able to make a lot more impact. So this is a small impact, a small example of how understanding the culture can help us improve our offering in a marketing sense to consumer.
So can you give like an instance of how, continuing on the hierarchy bit, could you give an example of how you used this knowledge, this awareness in any of your campaigns, or if you have seen any brand implementing this, in hindsight, that someone actually leveraged it to create something more meaningful in terms of the communication that they send out?
Right. So, the answer is that there is stuff in the book which will inspire you to do things differently. And there's also stuff that we have done or we believe the industry has done. Okay, the book is meant to go further than where we are today. So we are leaving some nuggets and people are free to explore what it means. But I can give a few examples of hierarchy, which is either consciously or subconsciously been used by Indian advertising and marketing community. Okay. You would find a lot of the times in our communication, we show the person as feeling better than the others, whether it's a fairness cream or grooming or, getting into a top-notch sort of vehicle, automobile, and then looking at others who haven't got it. There are very, very nice, subtle instances of how we tend to get significance to our consumers by giving them products which help them stand out. Standing out is essentially an attempt at making you better than the others. It is far more deep-rooted in the Indian culture than in the Western ones, where people are more happy to be creative in their own right. In India, social recognition becomes very important. Okay, most of our creatives end up with either an envious eye of a neighbor, or in the cases of teens and tweens, a win with the opposite sex, and so on. Those are all instances of hierarchy, being the best on the campus, being the smartest guy. There's always the better than proposition. Now, specifically, you're asking me what examples have I used in my life. I ran a campaign on Maggie called Me and Mary Maggie, which was all about the examples of how you in your life have enjoyed your Maggie. And we ran a full campaign where we even got consumers to write back to us. I'm talking about 2007 or 8, when even UGC or the digital technology had not evolved so much, and we were sort of swarmed with responses by consumers who talked about how their Maggie was special, because my Maggie, the way I make it, is better than the others. And you guys are on campus, everybody has their own recipe, and that comes from my Maggie is the best. So we ran this campaign. It did very well because it resonated. See, you don't have to say it always, but you have to resonate with the idea, subtly, overtly, partially. That is all a creative call. But if you resonate the idea, then you get the response. Then we ran one campaign in Pepsi when I was in the advertising side called Mera Number Kab Aayega, which was by Cyrus Barucha was the guy, and he's basically there is a sort of draw of lots, and he keeps losing. Then he gets it one day, and it becomes bigger than others, and that again resonated. So when you give a social context and when you make the consumer win versus the others, give him a sense of being the topmost, then you touch that chord and you get empathy and good response from consumers. And there are many more examples that I can think of, but it is important to give in India the sense of significance. If you go to Maslow's hierarchy, and we've written about that, the one thing that actually stands out in India is the importance of social significance. We are always trying to be bigger, better, bolder, smarter than the other person. And that is our inherent tendency to be hierarchically superior to the person next to us. In a crowded society, it is also a very logical thing, otherwise you get lost.
Arvind, picking up from a very specific word that you mentioned, and there was this abundance that Trupti and Arvind, you both have sort of flooded the book with, and plenty of new terms there, right? You mentioned tweens, but then I see gargantuan kids, hurricane, I see intra, supra, inter, segmentation, and all sorts of positioning. I see so many new words that I have never heard, right? And I'm like trying to recall any class that I would have had. Yeah, this though never got discussed in any of our classes by any of our professors, right? We never looked at segmentation in this way. We never looked at targeting in this way. And I'm just wondering, I mean, did you come up with, did you coin these terms? Did you coin all of this while writing this book? Or
it's like, and let me give you a bit of, because this is a big book based by practitioners, it calls out things which have not been spoken of before for various reasons. Yeah. And what I find very amusing is that while our social conversation is very rich with metaphors, while the hostel conversation, you guys have been in hostel, I've spent my entire life, we have very rich metaphors on who comes from where, and everybody knows them. Even in advertising discussions, which happen sometimes, they surface. Maybe sometimes in the meetings that we have when we do creative meetings, or in the breaks. But when it comes to actually cracking the communication, we tend to be very hypocritical, and we hide them behind our back. Mm-hmm. And you know what? We talk about the metaphors from the West. So people talk about baby boomers and Gen X and Gen Y, but these are not things one uses on campus. When I was in Stephens and DU, we used to have a different language altogether. But we've so much living with borrowed metaphors and words that we haven't had the pride or the objectivity to reflect ourselves as we are. And what I've called out is not something new. I've sometimes given words to either emotions that exist or words that are used, but they've not been used in marketing context. But if marketing is not going to be where the consumer is, it will always be distant. So if you accept the fact that we talk like this, which I'm sure we do, but we don't act like that, then there's a gap. And marketeer's job is to close the gap and come closer to consumers. So please, let's start talking about it. And honestly, the recent campaign of Make My Trip with Ranbir Kapoor and Alia, where he's in three avatars, one as a suave Punjabi, but suave guy, but underneath a very Punjabi guy, if you know what I'm talking about, or a Gujju, then these stereotypes have been used very successfully, and look at the resonance that consumers have given it back. So if you are willing to accept the reality and have the courage to make communication that accepts it, that reflects it, you get a mammoth response from consumers. But if you take a Western commercial and you try and keep those sensibilities and modify for India, you get nothing out of it. So part of the attempt in the book is also to call out the rich Hindi vernacular, local, whatever it is, and bring it out of the closet so we can talk about this and talk to consumers more intimately, which we have been so far been a bit shy of. So segmentation, which is really an attempt to understand the consumer psychographics, must really be understood in the way we talk about it. The language, the understanding, the cultural nuances must come out. Only then will marketing propositions become real.
But have you seen mainstream application of these Indian specific terms, lingo, coming out in your work environment? Have you seen people actually applying them in the practical
Some are
world?
being applied, some are clear opportunities. So a lot of the marketing bias is towards the teens, and I think teens areas has been exploited. But if you look at segmentation that I have talked about, where you have a generation which comes from the social Nehru generation to the ones who are even sometimes 60 plus, who are almost like retirees, and those who came the generation of the ambassadors in Fiat cars, those have not been spoken to. Because they've been somehow out of the marketing focus. And there is a large chunk of people sitting there, almost 20-30% of population of India is either old or geriatric, or on the other side, I talked about the segmentation of, gargantuan kids, because kids are big consumers of categories. And they basically are reflections of the Indian aspiration for social mobility. I've talked about mobility in the book also, and Trupti explained that in some other chapter that she wrote. But if you look at these cohorts, but we haven't seen them sufficiently, there are actually big opportunities. We don't have many nutrition solutions for geriatrics. We don't have good grooming options for slightly older adults, male young adults, even though that population is coming up. We don't have very good parenting applications and service opportunities for young kids who only get one or two formula to add to the milk. There is a lot more that they can get for meeting the parents' growth anxiety. So there are many opportunities which will throw up, but you have to segment the way India is cut, by looking at generations, by looking at cohorts, by looking at the need states and anxieties of either themselves directly or their custodians.
And today with digital, it is possible to, cater to a specific segment. Earlier, that was not, because you made one advertisement which was for the entire generation and which was shared on TV. But today, with digital, you can actually isolate a segment and talk directly to them. So I think it's a big missed opportunity if you don't identify the psychography and the way we've called out the segments. Sometimes you have an opportunity to combine segments, make a bigger segment, and yet pull out specific things which can be applicable universally. So I think it's important to know, first of all, that there are these segments, and then decide how you want to use them in your communication or innovation.
Actually, you brought out a very interesting word there, Trupti. When you talk about digital marketing, right? I was wondering that when you classify your market, when you segment them, let's say, picking up from Arvind or picking up from you, gargantuan kids, right? While we have explained how they are in terms of their traits,
Yeah.
how do you really pick them out? How do you really target them in the digital world? How do you, are able to even reach out to them, separate them from the rest of the crowd, and make sure that whatever you're communicating is reaching out to just those people?
Yeah, so first the first essential part is to know what this segment stands for and what are their triggers, motivations, barriers. So if I were to go exactly the way it is done or it should be done, is the first thing is to get into focus groups and qualitative research. To identify what is it that resonates with these consumers, what is it that they're scared of, what are their barriers, motivations, they feel their emotions. Once you have that, then you can probably design uh, either a communication which you think is going to attract that specific TG. So it's the process is first a qual research, to understand where they are. The second step is probably a sizing of the segment to see if it is it a decent size, for you to go after, and that can be done by a quant research by putting in those statements and seeing what is the resonance with those statements. Once you know that there is a size which is meaty, you either design your communication which caters to those specific aspects, or you may decide to club two segments, as I said, and then go after something which applies to both the segments. You can do digital by that. You can actually go out and do direct marketing to those segments if you know where they are placed, because when you do these checks, you know what is it that they want in terms of need. You know how to reach them, because they will tell you what are the things that they do in a typical way. They'll tell you what they don't like and what they like. They'll tell you what is it that influences them. So if there's an influencer angle to it, then you can accordingly do, who is it that they look up to. So I think you really need to spend time with these consumers to understand their traits, and then utilize those traits to reach them in the right communication which will engage them.
Sauradeep, so Tripti has very, I guess, clearly explained the steps on what we need to do in order to have an effective communication and targeting, right? And I believe that you had a question around this about startups and about the effort that we take into research. So if you don't mind putting that across.
Sure. So, Trupti, Arvind, you guys have put in very elaborately the steps one should kind of go through from Indian perspective in order to create a great brand and a campaign around it, right? In order to market it successfully. Perhaps leaving out the communication aspect apart, which, by default happens to be a costly one. How do you kind of so for me, perhaps as a startup founder, or me perhaps as a SME business owner, how do you think is it, how much resource is it needed for me to kind of create a successful brand out of what I already have, following all the steps that you have mentioned? Or is it at all feasible for a small business to kind of go through it? If so, how do they do it?
Look, it's a very wide and sweeping question, and one has to take it into pieces. If you're a startup, it depends on what need or opportunity you're looking at. If it's a mass need, a mass opportunity, then you would obviously struggle, because you would need to have a scale appropriate to the ambition you've set for yourself, and you would clearly lack it. So what you would probably do in that case is to choose a market. If it may be a mass area, let's say if you're launching biscuits, which is a very mass category, and you cannot take on the likes of a Britannia and a Parle because they are large players, you might be well advised to go into a market, a small market, maximize your potential there, and then scale up. But you have to be therefore very clear that your proposition is sufficiently unique. And we've seen that happen in East, where Bisque Farms has done it successfully. And they've managed to get a part of the share in the East, but they haven't gone that national. So it's a part success, part limitation. Then there is Priya Gold, which has done some good work, again, in the confectionery space. Though, honestly, I think they are lagging on some aspects, but they managed to sort of grow that. So those are mass marketeers who begun on a small basis and then grown the business over time in one or two states. Those are probably the more difficult ones. They will take longer, and the challenges may be more. But if you're looking at a niche opportunity where your idea is specific, your audience homogeneous, and thereby either by geography or the psychographics restricted to a certain place, and you can access them, then your chances are higher. So, for instance, if you're launching a premium brand, which typically happens to be quite exclusive, you are better off. If you're launching a specific solution which caters to a smaller segment in size or affiliation, then again, you're better off, right? So there, startups have a better chance, because the cost of doing business will be lower for them. The patrons will like it because it is kind of exclusive to them. So if you're launching a special, a special acne cream, let's say, which targets a small segment, but the acne cream is, and we would describe this idea. It's based on innovation and actually in Middle East, but we've taken it hypothetically. The acne cream can actually come in the shape of a yogurt. Then this idea is new. It is a bit revolutionary, and it appeals to a specific audience. Then a startup has a good chance because the media opportunities available are sufficiently tight and cohesive to make the ROI all right. So then you can choose to do it, let's say, in a part of Bombay City, let's say the more affluent areas. You can use the Facebook methodology of going tight. You can use the pin code led geographical distributions to target your consumers, and you can speak to them in a lesser cost and with higher conversions. And if you get good response from a limited audience, but with high adoption and high usage and presumably high value, then your product is able to succeed. So that's an example of a niche idea for a limited market. Then you could also have some in the middle, and they could be a hybrid where you start small and go big, where you start from niche digital media, local media to mass media, and so on. But the important thing, as we always keep highlighting in the book, is to know which consumer need are you getting to, how sufficiently differentiated are you, and what is your credential or the reason to believe, as we say in the concept, which makes consumers come to you and say, look, we believe this is true. So I'll give you an example. A2 milk is a new opportunity, right? And it is for people who either know the science of A2 milk, or it is for those who value the milk of the traditional cow, the Deshi cow, as we call it. So in this case, there's an opportunity which is specific. It's segmented to a set of users who, by either of the mindset, believe the idea is all right. And there it's working well because in a small area in North India, they are sourcing the milk, they're selling to consumers, and they're able to communicate in a very cost-effective way. And you know what? The opportunity is building up at a premium almost twice that of a normal milk. I believe this market will be big to play, and it is too large, it is too small for a multinational company or for a dairy player to look at. But it is sufficiently exciting and significant for a small player to do it. And you know what? Consumers will interestingly have a preference for the smaller players because the proposition is such that it smells of exclusivity. So if I'm not a mass player, actually it's my advantage in this case, right? So here is an example where the startup is using its scale not as a limitation, but as a credibility enhancer of its proposition. And that's very important to understand. So I mean, after looking at all these mass and scale and niche opportunities, what you must always be clear about is what is your proposition, how differentiated, and how sufficiently backed by science, logic, emotion is your interpretation of that offer. If these stack up well and if you believe consumers are lining up to believe it, then you have a case. Problem is if you don't have that and you start with either a good product but a lousy credibility, great product but not sufficient scale behind it in terms of money, or great product but unwisely spent over a large geography, and therefore the returns become less, and the investors get restless for returns when there's too much money being wasted. So that is where startups fail. And therefore one has to be very careful about what the proposition is, who is the market and the audience, and what is the best way to service it, along with your credibility to make that offer vis-a-vis the others in the market. Those are things that determine really how successful will the startup be and what model is best adapted for it.
This is interesting, and I'll tell you why. So we got a question from Marquity, right, which was based around cult brands, and I will just read it out, right. In your book, you explain that any given product could have one of the four possible fates among replication, fusion, indifference, and creation. And then it is continued by how you can predict the outcome of a business effort based on the traits of Indian society, right? Which is exactly what Arvind was doing right now when he was giving examples of what brands would do, how they would succeed, how they would grow. um, and while I would love for you to elaborate on that bit about how products do fall into these categories and what traits do you look at. uh, Soradeep and I were discussing this specific example of Micromax, right? um, And you're talking while in your chapter about positioning, you're also talking about how some Indian brands are taking a very generic position of make in India or India first, nation first, position, and sort of capitalizing on that. Now Micromax is coming back with a new phone called IM, and their entire position is that they want to compete head on with these Chinese brands, and they want to position something that is entirely made in India for the Indians by the Indians. Um, I would like to sort of get your minds on how do you see this specific campaign picking up? How long do you think it's relevant? How do you think it's going to work? How do you think it's going to be accepted by the people in India?
You're basically asking me to predict the outcome of
Exactly.
Micromax's new thing,
Exactly.
which is the short of the story is that. So let me start with a bit of abstraction, because prediction is often a dicey game. But the abstraction can give us a clue to what may happen or may not happen, and even the future, the way it will unfold, may be very, very indifferent to our predictions, because there will be variables at play eventually which we don't know of. How many people had seen COVID? And COVID has actually ruled out all of the variables and determined business in India this year, which nobody could have foreseen. So I think there will be an element of uncertainty every year in the times to come, which will make predictions more difficult. But the fundamentals of consumer need and uniqueness of your proposition will not change so much. So now to go back to your point, first of all, in the mobile industry, clearly, as it happened in the watch industry, when Titan came versus HMT, they changed the whole game from from the time keeping of a device to the proposition of making that a gifting accessory. Okay, that fundamental shift was achieved, which is almost contrary to the product proposition, but it moved the dial for Titan significantly to make HMT redundant. And today, Titan is gifted more than for its functionality of time, which I think is the way it was done before. Now, what's happening in the mobile space, interestingly, is there's a change happening suddenly and overtly, both ways. Overtly, because for some time now, the phone, for its functionality, is not being spoken of. Nobody talks about clear voice, or no call drops, or what pertains to the voice, which is what phones do essentially. And everybody's talked about images. So they've taken the market of Canons and so on, and they've implanted the virtues of a camera into a mobile phone. So there is a convergence which has happened, and convergence to the extent that actually phones are looking like surrogate cameras in your hand. And then the war that we've described in the book has been entirely on the basis of features of the camera. So whether it's pixel or the ease of using the camera for taking selfies to a dual lens and so on, the whole development, it almost seems as though the Canons of the world and so on, Nippon should have been playing in the mobile industry, when it's actually the other way around, where the mobile guys are playing in the camera segment. Uh, the Micromax innovation is still built a bit, I believe, on factors which may be a bit extraneous to consumer considerations. Now, if I was in the industry, I would go back and ask, what is more important? Are people going to be driven by the making or the origin of the mobile phone, which a lot of people have fallen like ninepins? And we've discussed in the first chapter in the vision that Indian companies have a bit of predilection to be politically, socially appropriate. If you look at the vision statements of most of our companies, it is around be the first. Again, that's the hierarchy, by the way. Be the first, the most trusted. But it's also a bit about being the favored providers of solutions, to be seen favorably by the government. Trustee word is used, trust and all these things are used. So there is the conscious, unconscious sort of gaze of the government, which has been kept on the radar of most companies' visions. This one to me also smacks a bit like make the most of Make in India proposition and grow the business, right? But what is the consumer asking for? And I think Micromax would be better placed to step back and see what consumer needs are either suboptimally satisfied or not satisfied at all. And I'm not sure from the kind of innovations they're bringing out, the ones you described, they've actually done fundamental work on the unserviced need of this segment, right? There is a lot that is happening, and I think this market needs to be now segmented. It's all offering mobile phones to the youngsters, but there are many more users to mobile phones. When we began the journey, there were only youngsters. Today, it is the poor man on the street to the rich man with a disposable income 10 times that, from a young little kid in class 8th or 9th who's now actually studying from home, to a geriatric out 70 who's connecting. Has somebody marketed the phones basis that segmentation? No one. I remember recently I ran a campaign in Northeast Guwahati, and it fell flat because I realized that in Guwahati, the majority of phones are not smartphones, they're feature phones. So a lot of the campaigns that we ran with fancy graphics or requiring high sort of speeds on the internal chip were not there. And you know where the growth is happening? It's happening in the vernacular space. And what are the kind of mobile phones they're using? Probably below 3,000 rupees. Second hands. Once those have been recycled, right? And in some places, they may not even have sufficient electricity. So the charge will never last them for an hour or two. These are mass markets that nobody's looked at. But people are fighting on the top sliver of the urban metro slick consumer, probably wanted to buy a 10,000 rupees plus phone. You know, that market will have its takers and it will have its losers, but it's actually a very small part of the entire pie. I wish Micromax had done a larger segmentation and cut the market for the phones for specific users. And that will be a whole new marketing approach. And even if you have to go really tight on youngsters where the battle is being fought, you know, which is on the basis of features, on apps and so on, I think it's time for them to look at the app confusion and to look at ways to enable the consumer to sift between apps, improve loadability, uh, improve quality of the data that being serviced, to find a filter to sift what is useful, what isn't. You know, those are also service opportunities for the mobile phones that they've not looked at. So there is a whole gamut of opportunities that are there, but everybody's stuck in, 4 pixel, 6 pixel, this feature, that feature, quick recharge and so on. Yes, it will get you a battle. It will win you a few, but only in a part of the market and not for long, because somebody will come and do a +1 on that. So am I a big fan of Micromax? No. Will they do some job? They will make some noise. They will get GRPs. They'll win the market, but they will trigger the reaction equally fast from the others around, from the Xiaomi of the world, who will probably ape them and even outlast them in the market. And it will be over in 6 months. And marketing campaigns are judged by sustainability. This one is clearly not really adding up there.
Well, taking on from the previous question, well, right now, too many brands seem to be cashing in on the Make in India emotion that, perhaps if you kind of do a market research, it will reflect the same, that the consumers are running high on Make in India. But as a marketer, when you kind of spend considerable time, energy in creating a campaign, and by the time you launch it, you see, the audience has moved on, being very volatile. What do you do? How agile you have to be as a marketer?
This is a very practical problem that from the time you diagnose to the time you bring out the solution, so much time lapses that you may end up being redundant or a me too. And the one thing that managers have to be conscious of is that once they diagnose a problem, they have to move fast and bring it before others can. So speed has become very vital. And Trupti and I have worked on many brands where the speed was as critical as the innovativeness of an idea to succeed. So nobody can take that away. I think that will be very important. If, however, you do get late and you find that by the time, like for instance, today, every product in the market is talking about immunity. There are even plywoods and paints which give you immunity from virus. It is hilarious as hell. I don't think they're doing anything to their category, but they'll make the claim of others who have a real play on that sound very superficial. Yeah. So unfortunately, India, imitations follow fast, and that reality will not change. I think the two ways to counter that is to make sure whether it's your Make in India proposition or any of these which become very much run of the mill very fast, to ensure that when you go out there, you actually make that proposition true across all elements of value chain. So whether it's the way you source, whether it's the way you cultivate relationships with your vendors, whether it's the way you buy media, the way you communicate, by the way you interact, it is truly Make in India. The way you sell, the way you retail, and the benefit you bring back to the community. And I'm glad you raised this question, because our last chapter, which was written before the Make in India campaign happened, reflects the sentiments of Make in India really well. India has had this long tradition of calling itself as one big family of Krishna. Now, there is a bit of a religious bias to it, but the idea is a bit secular, saying the whole world is one community. Krishna Kutumbakam, which is it is a joint family of Krishna. Right? Now, if you look at corporate social responsibility. It is very much in the same domain. Indians have always had it. It was just spelled out in a language which is either colored by vernacular or religion and therefore not liked. But it is truly an idea which is as universal as can be. Now, if your idea on Make in India is such that eventually it even goes back to the community, either you go back and enrich the farmers from where you source your crop for making the raw material of your food product, or the way you do cultivation for rubber for a tire company like a Seat and so on. If you do go back and really benefit the people who give you that value, then you make a difference. Then are you doing much for the improvement of the planet? How is your environment? How is your carbon footprint? Today, digital allows you to be a lot more transparent. I mean, I cannot name some of these things, but in one case, we actually had a live camera in one of our manufacturing locations to show the quality of detail and the rigor that had gone in for making of a certain product. And consumer response was overwhelming. Now, one is to say Make in India an advertisement and step back. The other is to show transparently every part of your value chain, to communicate how authentic is your Make in India. It's a different deal. And if you are doing the latter, of course you will win, even with the cliched idea. But if you don't have it, then you better shut up and do something else, because you're going to be one more in the sound in the crowd. So how will it help you? So I think the short answer is, if you have the proposition in authenticity and entirety, please go ahead, and even a Me Too will succeed in the long term because you have the credentials to stay longer in the game. If not, my suggestion is shut up, because anyways consumers will not listen to you, because if you're going to be one more extra noise, then you might as well look for another differentiation. And believe me, consumers show many nuances. They don't only reflect the sentiments of the nation, they also have personal needs. People still haven't stopped their fancy for imported goods. I'm sure about it. Right? So go back and undermine the consumer need there and offer something there. There is a whole new conversation today around Fair and Lovely, right? It's become very controversial. So I'll reserve my opinion. But I want marketers to go and check with consumers that no matter what you write on the pack, and you can change it, has the consumer sentiment changed? And if it hasn't, then that's another opportunity for you. Okay. So it does boil down a lot to going to the consumer, checking the need state, and reflecting their problems and solutions, not your interpretation, not the popular political narrative, not even the assumed popular social sentiment. Every consumer is an individual. Speak to them, find out, and find the solutions.
And I guess just calling out here, what it reminded me of was the identity onion that you were talking about at Naam, Upnaam, and what was I forgot a third one. Upadhi. Yeah. I guess that is brought out very beautifully in your answer, Arvind, again, because it is about I guess acknowledging these layers and then identifying the nuances that we can tap into to have a position that actually resonates with the consumers that we are trying to reach out to.
In one of the chapters, Cult Brand, readers, you should definitely kind of go through that particular chapter. I really liked it a lot. Trupti, you talked about the equation between the brands and the consumers, and then you kind of created 4 bucket: Swarthi, Swami, Sarthi, and then Swabhu, right? And you very elaborately kind of mentioned the journey from brands being greater than consumer to consumer being better than brands.
Yeah.
But what, in your opinion, is stopping brands from taking this journey to become a generic brand to a cult brand? So is it the ego of the marketers, or is it the red tape in the business houses? Why is the problem?
See, there are some brands, by the way, who have achieved, but it is a brand journey is a very arduous task where you have to be extremely authentic to the essence of the brand, right? Most of the times you find that marketeers play on the functionality of the brand, but that's the product. If you see, there are 2 aspects to the brand, right? There is a brand and there is a product. Product is what speaks of the functionality. So if I'll just give you an example of a brand that I worked on, Horlicks, for instance. What is the functionality of Horlicks? That it gives you vitamins, it gives you growth elements, and therefore you can have a nutritious drink which will be good for your growth, for your children as well as for the family. However, that's not the reason why the mother buys Horlicks. That will be, of course, because it is the product benefit. But there is much more beyond that, and when you start unpeeling that onion, what is it, what are the motivations that will make her choose you over and over again, despite there being competition from other similar MFD brands or other categories, is what will drive her loyalty. So emotionally, we realized that it was the pride of the mother, that she wanted to instill confidence in her child because of the changing environment, right? And today India is very, very competitive, right? For children, if you look at children, they are already straddling 5 things at the same time. They are studying, they are doing sports, they're almost everywhere. But there is this thing about uh, parents still want them to be pushed in a particular direction. So now what we realized, that a smart mother was the one who saw the opportunities outside and who could still instill that confidence in the child to be able to choose what they felt was their calling. Okay, so therefore we came up with this campaign called Badne Ki Bhook. Badne Ki Bhook had the both thing of growth as well as Badne Ki, as in you really want to rise high in life. So what I'm trying to tell you is, unless and until you get into the real emotional motivation that is driving the consumer, you will not be able to stir that loyalty. If you're transactional, and which is what most brands operate in, I'm whiter than you, I offer you better growth nutrients, or whichever category you're dealing in. And till the time you're transactional, the consumer will also see you that and will replace you at the next best opportunity. So there are 2-3 things. One is this emotional part. The second is, you as a brand have to take a slightly higher pedestal. So there are some, we spoke about needs. There are some needs which are spoken. There are some needs which are explicit, which are not explicit, which are hidden needs, but you are supposed to trigger those. And if a brand can be ahead of the consumer starts respecting the brand. And again, now I'm going to continue with Horlicks because we spoke about it a little bit. Today, again, if you look at the students, the exams in India is an absolute, it really creates a lot of stress because the whole family knows about the child's exams and everybody is into it. And, again, competition. So one of the things that we realized was today's children were so stressed that actually it was taking a toll on their childhood. It was not, and so we decided to take Kota as an example. Now, Kota, as all of you know, is the place where students go to achieve their IIT and therefore become engineers. And the way the conditions in which students live is really pathetic. There is hardly any infrastructure. They are away from their parents. A lot of them are poor people who can't even reach their parents consciously. And then, of course, there is a lot of failure, which is why there is stress. There are suicides. In fact, it's called the suicide capital of India. So as Horlicks, we decided to approach that because we said nutrition is not just physical nutrition. It is not even just mental nutrition, because we talk about sharper. So it's not just a sharp mind and a strong body. It is about emotional nutrition as well. And this emotional nutrition can be provided by the mother, and Horlicks, supports that. So we did an entire campaign talking about the plight of the students in Kota and how everybody, the environment and the parents can be more supportive so that the stress levels are reduced and they can actually go confidently and achieve their dreams. But at the same time, there is support. So if it doesn't happen, they can choose other ways. So now this campaign was received extremely well by people. And that is the time, that is the step where you start saying cult brands, because then more and more people want to take up your cause, because then you're not only talking for the brand and the product and the benefits, but you're talking about what the consumer feels, what the consumer resonates, and what is it that will take the consumer forward in their own journey. So I think a lot of brands need to realize that they need to understand, they need to stand for a cause, which again ties in very beautifully with their essence. So what Arvind spoke about some time back, just because immunity is the buzzword, you don't ride onto that bandwagon unless you have something, there's a credibility behind you that can support that immunity and that can do it better than other brands and what the consumer can do himself. So I think that's where many Indian brands fail to notice that, and we stray in a very transactional kind of a space rather than going beyond and taking. Again, Nike. Why is Nike such a big brand? One is consistently they have followed with the essence or with the dream that they offer to consumers, and which is why today Nike is a cult brand. But if you take some of the sports brands in India, we have not been able to achieve that level. So you need to provide a dream to the consumer, which is a dream that he or she really believes in, and then you need to support that journey such that the consumer then thinks that the brand is theirs, and therefore then there is a partnership which is very long term and a loyal partnership.
If I can just add to that, and the reason we've written this in Hindi deliberately is to infuse the idea of cult brands, which seems very exotic and Western, with Indian sensibilities, right? And we had this debate between Trupti and I when we were writing, should we go so vernacular in some of those descriptors? And I said we should. Why not? Because the language of the consumer is also richer in metaphors and hidden meanings that the English does not capture sufficiently. And why can't we have our own cult brands? The first thing to do is to cast the framework in Indian sensibilities. And what the evolution of Swarthi, Swami, Sarthi to Swabhu actually indicates is, in a very rich Indian sense, the evolution of a brand from being selfish providers of just the functional benefit to being the leaders, and when they talk, which is the Swami stage where we talk and consumers listen, to being a Sarthi when the brand walks along with the consumer, right? And you can think of some of those. To Swabhu, where the brand steps back and let the consumers do the talking. So in the case of the Horlicks, the consumers do the talking because the quota experience shows how believable is the campaign that mothers actually have a big role to play in the nutrition of the child, right? And today, the Swabhu brands of the world are the brands of Instagram and Facebook, because what are they? They're essentially only the platforms for people to express themselves. They are rich every moment because the consumer is operating with full liberty and the brand is just an enabler. So the cult brands have not worked in India, to your question earlier, so far, because Indian brands have not moved from being providers of functional benefit to being a partner in some cases. I think Fab India and Naturals have done that well because they do give the consumers a sense of being with them with their needs. But the ownership that the brand managers will pass to the consumers so that they can run their own brands has not happened yet. I'll give a small example. Satyamev Jayate, which is a show that Amir Khan ran. If you compare that with the Oprah's show, then Satyamev Jayate had the potential to become a cult, but did not because it was too much caught in the cult of the presenter and not the idea. It was too much caught in the idea of being preachy about what India is and not being honest about what Indians are, which Oprah's show is. Oprah's show is a cult because people come up and speak about their inadequacies openly and people resonate with that. So unless you give the power back to the consumers and only become enablers, brands will not become cult brands. And Swabhu is a word taken from the Indian mythology, which is self-created. And therefore brands have to evolve to a space where they let the consumers operate freely, because when brands become truly strong, then they have their own evangelists, their own advocates, their own ambassadors, and those are consumers. You don't have to speak to them, they speak for you. Indian brands have not achieved that cult status. So that is where we've challenged that idea with Western examples. And in 3-4 examples, we've tried to highlight how some of these brands are potentially placed to get there, but have not done so, and how they can do it. Okay. I hope that makes it clear.
It does. Why? Because it immediately reminded me of the example of the Me and Maybe Maggie campaign that you did for Maggie, right? I guess that's exactly what you were trying to achieve by having the consumers take the center stage and bring out their stories, and then of course everyone else will connect with them. So that example drives the point, and I would thoroughly compliment you on your use of the vernacular of Indian language, I guess, because that one drives the point very easily and it helps with retention. Like now I can't recall what's the journey is like, what are the different segments like. So it becomes very easy for me to sort of, without taking an active effort, to have that on top of my mind and actually use it in my practical use cases wherever I need to implement them. So I mean, I guess just kudos to both of you on that attempt. It was, I guess, a very great thought process to be sort of inculcating that into the book. um, and you know okay. um, so what you have done is, the book has a very natural flow, right? It starts with the culture, the understanding the consumer need, STP, then communication, brand, cult, brand's future, right? and you both have, I mean, since there are two authors who are married to each other, right? I'm just curious about, how was the journey like? Any interesting anecdotes, any arguments that you would have had on any given topics, or was it very like, is it like, Arvind said something and Trupti, you were like, oh yeah, this is absolutely sensible, and then Trupti said something, and Arvind is like, no, 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 this doesn't make sense. I would like to disagree. Any such interesting stories from the book while writing, your experiences, please?
What do you think? Would it have been an easy journey?
I'm so curious about this. I'm like, no, something interesting has to come out of this.
Uh, yeah, so okay, I'll give my side and then Arvind can maybe talk about what he felt. So first of all, the thought process of putting down a book, because we are cooperators, was itself something that I think took us some time. But Arvind was the one who was keen to write it, and I supported it. Uh, so the way we kind of see, again, we had our own experiences, and we discussed those, and we found that there were some commonalities and some places where we had different points of view, so what we did was, there were some chapters that I was the main person writing it, and some where he was writing it, but we ensured that we discussed each and everything that was written in the chapters, and there were sometimes lots of arguments, and we decided to trash it. So in fact, when the book started, there were, I think, 16 or 17 chapters. So there were things like, there were things like, not just selling strategy, but should it be also the financial strategy and the HR strategy? Because eventually that's what makes a business, and the book is a business book. Marketing is nothing without seeing how the business can be successful, right? So we started with a whole lot of that. Then we realized that somewhere, it was taking in a different direction, and we were not able to sufficiently explain certain concepts. So then we started putting that, deleting that and eliminating, to get into the kind of book that it is, a succinct book. So those things happened. There were times when one of us was very emotional about a particular point, and then that person had to convince the other. Till then,
Examples, Trupti. Specific,
uh,
sure.
we put a certain thing about maternity and fetal nutrition. I don't know if you've captured that. So initially, when Arvind was talking, he was more focused on the current brands and the companies that we worked in and what work they are doing. But I thought that because India is a very different market, and here, there is female feticide, which is there, which is a very unique condition, which I think would only happen in India. There are such kind of issues which I don't think any organization is picking up. So I felt very strongly about putting that together and talking about how. So I'm not explained much because these are thought starters, but bringing in those kind of things like female feticide, which is not spoken about, women, the gender inequality, which is just touched and left, but it is a lot of that. So if organizations can actually start working around that, and that's where, so we eventually put that, because that was something that I really believed needs to be taken up by brands who are in a position to have that stature, and therefore drive consumers toward that kind of a thought process. Maybe Arvind can have some more additions to the whole thing.
Yeah, I
was
mean, the light side of the
segmentation. See, Arvind tends to put a lot more, because there are so many ideas always there. He's an idea man. So segmentation, what you're seeing is probably 50% of what it originally was. So
Yeah,
I think that's another place. So I have been the chopper, and he's been, putting in that.
No, but just before you take it on, Arvind, I guess the moment you talk about these examples, right, Trupti, one thing that again I would like to call about the book is that it is not just another book which is giving you theory on broader frameworks on what you can do, but also actual takeaways in terms of, let's say, when you are doing segmentation, actual categories that people can use, right? Or actual opportunities that our brands can leverage. So there is money on the table that you have mentioned in the book for people for anyone who is reading, the right person who's reading it can actually use it to hit the market and get going, right? So that is, I guess, again something that many books miss, that you have again brought out very well. And again, kudos to you both on that. And Arvind, now your side of the story.
No, I was just going to start off saying that this book was written to reduce our professional differences. It's only managed to increase it tremendously. So the sequel that is coming will try that one more time, but I think the journey will continue for some time. So we have one more coming up. But as Trupti was saying, when you write a book, what eventually goes is only probably 30-40% of what you visualized, wrote, or so on. The good thing with two people writing is that a marketing book is a lot of creativity as well. Marketeers bring into world in a way what did not exist before, because that's what they charge a premium for. And that's what marketeers do. Creativity is very integral function of marketing. Now, the creativity can be outrageously bizarre, can be outrageous and still useful, or can be very cliched, right? And when two people write, they have the opportunity to actually test some of their ideas with the other person to bring to consumers eventually what is not just different but is also useful. Otherwise, my fear is sometimes if you were to write on a subject like this, and we were very very conscious that marketing is a very often written subject, and unless we have something new to add, we would not even attempt. But it ended up that there was so much to write, because we realized that a lot of people who write are usually advertisers or people who are from the theoretical side, and they don't have the appreciation of what eventually goes through the churn to bring value to consumers. And that's where there is so much more to write in spite of having written a book, and there is one coming soon which will take this idea forward. But the opportunity of two people makes it a far richer, because in a way one becomes the reader, the other becomes the writer, and then you flip the roles. And so the book has been internally scrutinized and made worth its size and effort in the making of it itself. And I think that is what we really enjoyed. And of course, because we are both from the same field, the quality of discussion, the rigor and the honesty which goes behind that is probably uncontested, because we have done it, right? We fought from the trenches, so we can tell you how it feels out there.
So we are at the very fag end of our conversation right now, and before closing, we generally have a section which we call what do the authors read. So your book right now is in our shelf of favorites, but what books do you have in your shelf of favorites? What are the books that have inspired you or you like to read, both of you?
Okay, Arvind, you want to talk about your Upanishad?
So, I mean, I read on a host of subjects. My interest is broadly in philosophy. So I've written a book on philosophy recently that has just come out. I write a lot. I also read a lot about astrophysics. I read. I mean, when you write a book, you have to scan pretty much all the management books. So all that is in circulation today, we've read. And you found some of them captured here. I think some books are captured in just 2 lines, and we've given the essence away. How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp, Simon Sinek's book, and so on. We've captured in the book and the essence of it, and we've actually given the readers a view on what we think is valuable and what they need to retain. So we read all of them. You have to read a lot to be able to write well and to be able to write comprehensively. What am I reading currently? Right now, I'm personally reading a book by Shankaracharya on Brahma Sutra, if you want to know. I find the quality of thinking on Indian philosophy is absolutely outstanding. And in the future, marketeers must borrow unabashedly, very happily from the Indian traditional culture, because we have the longest oral culture and so on, much better than the West. And there's plenty sitting there. And the first chapter talks about how Buddha talks about the Maslow's hierarchy in a far bigger depth than Maslow did in 20th century. Vibhav Tanha is an idea which is ahead of self-actualization. And so my journey personally will continue. And on the management side, there are a few books coming up. But honestly, I find some of the books, when you read 20 pages, you've read them all. But in our book, we guarantee you every page will be a new idea which has not been spoken of before. So that's been our attempt. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have been actually some of the books that we thought were really nice, and like Arvind said, have been captured in some degree in the book. One is Art of Idea, which we thought was really nice, and the way it was presented, again, very new concepts spoken about, was really nice. The First 90 Days is another nice book, which is for people who are entering into a new job situation or a new role, and how they can adjust to themselves. So I think there are some nice books some good books which have been there. The books that I have been reading are actually two right now, because I like to read two books at a time. One is Arvind's book Mahavir that he just spoke about, because that book I've not read at all. He said you should read once it is published as a book and not as the manuscript. So Mahavir is something that I've been reading, and I'm almost going to finish it. And it's quite a beautiful book, because while the name suggests Mahavir, it's not so much about Jainism, but it is about the philosophy and of Mahavir, and how to reach consciousness. I'm a coach, as probably you would have seen. I'm a leadership coach, so that interests me, and it's presented very beautifully as from the eyes of the daughter, who initially had anger and disappointment and hatred about how could a father leave her and go, at a young age. It starts from there, and it translates into pride and love for the father. When she understands the journey that Mahavir took, why he did what he did, and how he's reached there when she listens to a mom. So I think it's a very beautifully put, narrated book, and that's really keeping me busy. And the other book that I have started reading is The Atomic Habits. I think you guys would have spoken about it. So I'm just on the third chapter right now. Let me see. It's interesting so far. So let me see how it goes.
That's quite a eclectic variety of books that you are reading, really from everywhere to everywhere. And I guess that shows in the way we have conversations with you. The sheer diversity of topics that you can talk on, and the way you talk about them is thoroughly fascinating. So I mean, and with this, we have indeed come to the end of this episode. And Arvind, Trupti, first of all, thank you so much for being sport and entertaining us with your time. I know we did exceed it by quite a lot, but I mean, we enjoyed it. It was fun having both of you here, and get to know something. I actually have very key takeaways in this conversation. That actually stay with us in the long run. So it was wonderful for both Souradip and I. Again, thank you for being here. And we wish you all the best for your forthcoming books, and looking forward to more interesting ideas, looking forward to more interesting content to read.
Thank you very much, and all the best to both of you.
Right.
Thanks, and all the best to both of you. Really enjoyed it.